It feels like deja vu all over again. We went through 2020 talking about litigation being filed in various states around the country. Democrats are smart. They move pieces around like on a chessboard. And this guy is one of the chess masters. In 2020, he filed lawsuits under various names like the Retired Association of America, Michigan Retired People's Party. And they would all file these claims and they would change very important rules that may have impacted the outcome of the election. Some people say it did. In fact, in Wisconsin, we know that the vote totals there were only 20,600 votes. That was the difference between Trump and Joe Biden. And Marc Elias filed lawsuits in 2020. He's doing it again in 2024. Here's some background on this before we see exactly what he's trying to do in Wisconsin, which is a very important state, very close margins. He's trying to get the absentee rules changed. Some background on this from Yahoo. They say that a new lawsuit was filed in Wisconsin by a national Democratic law firm that seeks once again to allow voters to return absentee ballots into Dropboxes. So after 2020, the Supreme Court in Wisconsin said you can't do that, but Marc Elias and the Elias Law Group filed another lawsuit. The court is going to change power very soon. 2 weeks from now, the Wisconsin Supreme Court is going to flip from conservative to liberal, which is why this lawsuit is being filed right now. So that when it lands in front of the Supreme Court, the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which will now be liberal, will grant it. Election law challenges like this are among many issues that the liberal court is expected to rule on. There were other rulings. The Supreme Court in Wisconsin said that the elections commissions did not have the authority to tell election clerks that Dropboxes could be placed around Wisconsin. Of course, Marc Elias says that is unconstitutional, and they also want signatures waived. So let's take a look at this lawsuit. There will be many more of these. They are going to be filing these in states like Arizona, Michigan, Georgia, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and they're getting started early this election cycle. This was filed July 20th, 2023 in Wisconsin. Same people that we're familiar with, literal deja vu from 2020. The Alliance for Retired Americans. And if you were here with us during the last election, this was the same type of filing that we saw in many locations. This is how they get standing on these claims. And so Elias and his other entities are suing the Wisconsin Election Commission. And they're saying that this is a lawsuit. And in other words, the government, you have to respond to us because you are violating our civil rights. Here's what Marc Elias says. He says the Wisconsin Constitution guarantees the right to vote. For more than a century, Wisconsin has protected these rights. But this case brings a constitutional challenge to 3 rules that might burden the vote. When we talk about voting rights, we have this spectrum, almost competing interests. We talk about voter enfranchisement, which you often hear from the left, like the right to vote. Everybody deserves the right to vote. You know, your voice, your vote, all that means everybody votes no matter what. You can vote at a drive-through. You can vote by text message, vote 3 times by text. Who cares? It's your voice, man. Go vote. On the other side of the spectrum, we have voter integrity. We say, wait a minute now, it's not, you can't text message it. You need ID. You need to verify you are who you say you are. We need proper chain of custody from the ballots. You can't just Xerox them and send them in. And that's called voter integrity. So voter enfranchisement versus voter integrity. And we're always trying to find the balance between the two. How can we have integrity in our voting that also enfranchises a lot of people? And this is this balance that we play with back and forth. But here in Wisconsin, after 2020, they said that was a little bit too much enfranchisement, if you know what I mean. We're going to have a little bit more voter integrity this next election. And now they're challenging that. They're saying, wait a minute, that's too much voter integrity. You're going to require IDs and signatures and all this stuff. That means we can't steal this thing. And so we want to pull it back and call those new changes unconstitutional. And we're talking about 20,000 votes. It's a very tight margin here. So this case is challenging 3 voter integrity rules. They say it makes it more difficult for voters to cast an absentee ballot. Wisconsin long ago said that voting is more than just a mere privilege. And absentee voting is a very important part of what we're doing in Wisconsin. Long been able to have no excuse absentee ballots cast. Many people rely on this. Over the past 15 years, 4.6 million ballots have gone out. It's important for people with limited mobility and all sorts of other things. But now, despite all of this, Wisconsin, the legislature, has improperly erected multiple barriers to absentee voting, which makes it difficult for Wisconsinites to vote. This case challenges those rulings. Priorities USA is a nonprofit. They're working for the Dems. They're registering and spending $75 million in Wisconsin. Good Lord. The challenge restrictions are harming them. Wisconsin people, Alliance for Retired Americans, 15,000 members in Wisconsin, so they're getting standing through there, and the rest of the people who are involved in this case. Now, for background, they say, in 2018 in the midterms, over 500,000 Wisconsin voters used ballots, driven by the COVID pandemic. That surged in 2020, and they changed a bunch of rules in that era. Interest in absentee voting remains high. Look, this is not like voting by mail. In 2020, more than 2 million Wisconsinites successfully cast absentee ballots. When I think of an absentee ballot, I think of it as a non-normal ballot, right? And there's a small portion of people who are not in the state who vote absentee. But 2 million is a big chunk of that. And so I think that this, as a definition, it's just voting by mail. Interest in absentee voting remains high. Could be wrong about that. Nearly 760,000 Wisconsinites voted using absentee ballots. But for the hundreds of thousands of Wisconsin voters who rely on absentee ballots, they're going to get abused. The state agency that administers elections created new guidance to regulate the elections. They've issued a manual which provides new rules and how they can comply with the law. Now, this is what they're so upset about. The new manual says that if you use an absentee ballot, you've got to have a witness requirement. It says that if you use an absentee ballot, it must be witnessed by a U.S. adult citizen, and you must vote in the presence of an adult witness. And they don't like that. They don't want you to have witnesses. The witness requirement is extremely burdensome for many voters. More than 600,000 Wisconsin voters, including members of this alliance, do not have anyone in their house who can act as a witness. They've got limited mobility, and so they can't vote if we have this. In 2020, under COVID, they issued guidance with solutions to this law, saying that people could drive up, you could do video chats, you could Skype or FaceTime, you could leave it outside the door, people will show up at your house. These solutions are still burdensome, and so we can't have witnesses. The waning of COVID-19 has not eliminated the burdens of the witness requirement. Hundreds of thousands of witnesses, of Wisconsinites, don't have someone who can verify this for them. And if there is any error on the ballot, they say that you can only cure this once again back in the company of the person who was the witness in the first place. They say this witness requirement also violates the privacy secret ballot rights under the Constitution, and there are other less burdensome ways that we can get voter integrity without doing the witnesses. So they want no witnesses for their absentee ballots, which is a big portion of their voting. They also don't want Dropboxes to go away. In 2020, they used Dropboxes. Thousands of voters used Dropboxes without incidents, as we know, but the Supreme Court and others have said it's okay. But since some rulings, they said that you cannot accept Dropbox ballots anymore, and they're upset about that. They say election mail delay is documented. The Dropbox are better than the mail. In the midterms, something like, wow, one of the 5 lowest performing processing and delivering centers, nearly 14% of election mail was delivered later than expected. And there's also ballot delivery problems. So in other words, the mail is less reliable than the Dropboxes. They really, really love these Dropboxes, man. I wonder what that's all about. They say it's no answer to say that voters should just mail their ballots back early. Many voters don't decide until the days before, and Dropboxes allow them to drop those off conveniently, safely, so that they can be returned on time. We don't want to mail them. We want to drop them off. There's also questions about the election day cure deadline. If they sign the certificate, there's a deadline by which, if there's a problem with the ballot, they've got to cure it, and they say that is not appropriate. They say Wisconsin has various different statutes. These are the legal principles that interpret how we're going to govern this, and they're saying essentially that they want this new regulation, this new rule, this new election manual to be declared unconstitutional, to throw it out. Many Wisconsin voters vindicate their voting rights through the absentee ballot. Requiring voters to jump through these hoops burdens their fundamental right to vote, and therefore it's unconstitutional. They want declaratory judgments that we can have Dropboxes back and that all of the old rules are in play. The election day cure deadlines are what they were, so that they can run the same playbook that they ran in 2020. They want the instructions in Wisconsin to be held invalid. Same with the manual, deeming that they all violate the Wisconsin Constitution, signed by these lawyers from the Elias Law Group. Same people involved in a ton of litigation in 2020. And so they are doing it again, my friends. All of those little changes around the margins, they all add up. Last time they did it on the back of COVID, but this time they're going to do it on the back of, we did it during COVID and you can't change it back. We've already done it. It's way better for us. And if you change it back, now you're violating a new right that we've essentially created by changing the rules under the COVID pretext. This is going to continue to happen. We'll see it in other states. This guy and his law firm, very aggressive with this. We'll see if the Republicans have an answer for it as the election moves forward. Thank you for subscribing as we continue to cover. We'll see you on the next one.